2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciac, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Carter.
Present.
Mr. Young. Mr. Walters. Here. Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Carter.
I move to excuse Mr. Young and Ms. Hubick from tonight's meeting.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Carter, a second by Ms. Cleveland McGrath to excuse Mr. Young and Ms. Hubick. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, just one announcement, trestle work. We're excited that we're going to get, the demo has been complete on the trestle restoration project, and we hope to get work maybe late. It gets things staged late this week, but the only drawback to that is we're going to have to close the causeway. We've had that open up to the RV park, but we're going to have to close that to stage to get prepared for the work going on. So again, good news that we're moving forward on the trestle repair. But we'll have to close the causeway as we're getting that done. Next, announcements and committee reports. Oh, I've got Historic Preservation Board appointment. And I am pleased to present to Council Ralph Walter for Councilor confirmation to the Historic Preservation Board. This is a new term, and it's a 3-year term effective through December 31st, 2025, and I think you're here. Okay. Well, thank you very much for volunteering. So, Council, if I could have confirmation.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland.
I would like to confirm Mr. Walter to the Historic Preservation Board.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Cleveland, a second by Mr. McDougall to confirm Mr. Walter to the Historic Preservation Board. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and thank you. I appreciate you volunteering. Okay, there is, I think HASC actually met. It's not on the agenda, but I believe HASC met last week. Do I have a report? Ms. Cleveland.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to just pull up my notes. Yeah, so we had a good meeting. We talked a bit about what's going on with some of our homeless population on T Avenue and around. So we have a partnership kind of established preliminarily with Helping Hands for them to provide a dumpster and porta potty just to kind of help keep things clean. We are going to, as the HACS committee, attend this week and do the walkthrough of T Avenue. I think all of us have done it in the past, but we haven't done it for a number of months, so it's good for us to stay up to date and know what's going on. You know, there's a lot of services being provided, but we also know that there is a real challenge for adjacent property owners, and what we need to do is what we're trying to do, I think, as a committee, is figuring out how to mitigate kind of the negative impact that the debris has on adjacent property owners. That's kind of one of our main focuses. We've got a great outreach team that includes the fire department, the police department, the family center, Helping Hands, Community Action, to provide services, but it's an ongoing struggle, as we all know and have heard. The other thing we discussed some at length, we had Mr. Hoagland there, and we discussed the utility bill discount program. We've got one currently. There's only about 40 who are enrolled in it. It's about a 20% discount for folks below an area median income level. It's our goal to try to give a more significant discount, and then also make sure that folks who should qualify or do qualify actually utilize this opportunity. So we're looking at kind of the property tax exemption for seniors and disabled folks to automatically be enrolled. We're kind of working on those details. But we kind of talked about 20% discount, 50% discount, further doing kind of a graduated program, or if it should just be straight across the board. And I think our goal as a committee is and council members, from our perspective, is to try to find something that has enough teeth in it, that it's significant enough that it impacts those the folks who are able to utilize the program, but also makes it easy to for the finance department to enroll and kind of maintain records and get it functional. So I think that's all we discussed, unless anyone else, Mr. Walters, has anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Any other announcements and committee reports that we may have missed? Okay, moving on to item 4, which is public comment. This is the opportunity for any member of the public to address the council on anything that's not on our agenda tonight. And I don't have anybody signed up, but I saw some folks come in late. Anybody want to address the council? Looking for a hand up online for our one attendee. Okay, we're going to move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda, items A, B, and C. Council.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Carter to approve the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. On to item 6. Closed record decision hearing. This is a conditional use permit for Morrison Court Bed and Breakfast. This is a discussion with possible action. Ms. Pollard is going to be presenting. Ms. Pollard. Excellent timing. Got the slides up.
Thank you, Mayor. City Council, members of the public, this is the presentation for the closed record decision hearing of Project CUP 2022-0005, a conditional use permit to establish an owner-occupied and owner-operated single sleeping room bed and breakfast within an existing residence. This land use application is a Type 4 review, which requires City Council action as the decision maker. This presentation is a quick overview of information found in the staff report, which can be viewed within the agenda packet. Provided in the packet is a staff report outlining the applicant, Ellen Baglean's application to establish a single sleeping room bed and breakfast in her home at 2812 Morrison Court. No changes to the residence or the site are proposed, nor are they required. Under Anacortes Municipal Code, Title 19, Chapter 41, all short-term lodging rentals, meaning stays less than 30 days, are grouped under overnight lodging category. All overnight lodging types except bed and breakfasts are prohibited in residential zones. Establishing a bed and breakfast in our low-density or medium-density residential zones, as well as in Old Town, require this conditional use process. The conditional use process or permit, as stated before, is a review type 4, which begins with a required pre-application conference with city staff. It moves on to a required pre-application neighborhood meeting, notice of application, and a 21-day public comment period, interdepartment and agency reviews, a pre-decision open record public hearing with Planning Commission, and lastly, the closed record decision hearing here now with City Council. Requirements of operating a bed and breakfast within city limits includes the owner must be the operator of the facility and must reside on the premises. All sleeping rooms, including the owners as well as those of the guests, must be within the main residential building. In residential zones, it is required that the property have no outward appearance of a business, and parking must meet the standards of AMC 1964, which states 2 required parking spaces be provided for the single-family use, and 1 parking space per guest room be provided on-site for the bed and breakfast guests. The subject property, which is outlined here in red, is located off of Morrison Court, which I've outlined in blue, and that is off of Sunset Avenue. The surrounding neighborhood is zoned R2 and are primarily developed with other single-dwelling units. Here is another vicinity map showing the zoning designation of the area. You can see the site is mainly surrounded by other R2 properties. Morrison Court is a dead-end street. The subject property is located on the west side at the end of the road. It's developed with a two-car attached garage and surface parking areas. You can see here that the submitted site plan shows a total of 4 designated parking spaces will be provided on site. 2 located in the attached garage for use by the owner, and 2 surface parking spaces located east of the garage on an existing gravel parking area. And please note also that the requirements of the code require a minimum of 3 on-site parking spaces, but the applicant is providing 4 in case there is a couple who have rented out the bed and breakfast and bedroom and are not able to arrive together. Staff comments on each individual conditional use review criteria can be found in the staff report. I'm happy to go into more detail if the council would like me to, but to summarize, staff has reviewed the proposal and has found it to be consistent with requirements and criteria of a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast. Based upon the application, findings of facts, and conclusions of the staff report, staff's recommendation is approval of the conditional use process with the following conditions. 1, that the site plan shown here and dated January 4th be the approved site layout. And 2, that the applicant must obtain a City of Anacortes business license prior to operating the bed and breakfast. So unless there are any questions, I do want to confirm that there are no parties of record. We did not receive any written comments nor any comments during the open record public hearings. So that would conclude my presentation unless there are any questions.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder for the public, because it is a closed record decision hearing, only members who are part of that record can comment, so, and there aren't any. So it's over to council for questions, comments. Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pollard. I just want to thank the applicant, Ms. Bagleen, for going through this process, because we don't see very many of these. In fact, this is the first I remember in the almost 4 years I've been on council. And I think we have a lot of people that do this that we never find out about. And so I'm not sure, I'm guessing this person just wanted to do the right thing, because I don't think that there's a motivation otherwise necessarily. So I want to applaud the applicant, and I don't know if there is a way to incentivize people who are doing the same thing to apply, or if that there is a way that, I'm not sure how we address this, but it is notable that this is the only one that we've seen.
Any other questions, comments, motions?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
There's no further questions. I move that we approve the conditional use permit for Morrison Court Bed and Breakfast with the noted conditions.
Okay, a motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Mr. Walters. Any additional comment? Okay, Mr. Franciac, could you take the vote, please?
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are on to item 7, which is other business. Item 7A, interlocal agreement for the funding of public street improvements for the Early Learning Center. And this is an action item, and I think Mr. Lang is presenting.
Good evening. Steve Lang with the Public Works Engineering Department. Before you is a interlocal agreement, and I'm kind of excited to bring this before you. It's been in the works now for about 3 to 4 years just to get us to this point, and there's been quite a few people involved. It started off with the Skagit County. I'm going to do a little presentation. I got the Samish rep here. He wants to get up and say something as well. So just to kind of cap it off. Started off with the Skagit Council of Governments. At our level, we're part of the Technical Advisory Committee that make recommendations to the Skagit Council of Governments for regional traffic concerns and funding sources. And I was sitting there listening to one of the previous planning directors from the tribe kind of talk about a partnership with WashDOT and the Campbell Lake Roundabout. And I'm thinking, well, how cool is that? Why can't we do that in Anacortes? So we started having quarterly meetings with the tribe from the planning and just public works engineering, and identifying that we have engineering department, they don't have an engineering department. They have access to additional funding that we don't have access to. So our efforts were to get their road system and our road system in the federal highways list, so that way we can go for some funding. Since that time, we've had many new players, but the current Samish team is John Barrett, who's the planning director, and he's sitting in the back, and he'll come up here in a little bit. David Stritch, and Ken Portis. And with the city team, we have Henry Hash, Tim Holman, and myself. So in our efforts of getting together and talk and figure out projects, what would this look like? And I kind of highlighted it. We have an engineering department, they don't. They have access to funding that we don't. So we decided that we would come together and figure out a project that would be a win-win. It would be a simple one, and that's on tonight's docket. It's the 16th Street Early Learning Center. The other ones that we've talked about is the Fidalgo Bay Road. There's the pump station at the RV park that's in works, the Tommy Thompson trestle design, and also being a resource to the group for the 14 cottages up at 34th Street. So they call up, we meet, we talk, help them out. It's a good deal. So our objective was to partner with the tribe to meet the common needs and goals. So before you tonight, we have, and I turned it sideways just so I could get it oriented so I could make it bigger for folks to see. And I'm doing the Tim Holman one-page slide instead of multiple. We have towards the right there, we have the Early Learning Center location. To the bottom or to the left, we have the Longhouse, which they own as well. So we started off and ended up through a little bit of scope creep, and this is what you see. So 15th Street, we're going to put sidewalk that goes to the park. We're going to put along D Avenue, we're going to put curb extensions. We're going to put rapid flashing beacons. We're going to utilize the existing sidewalk on the east side. The west side is going to see new sidewalk, curb and gutter, so we can allow for more parking. And that'll go from 15th to 17th. 16th Street is going to be a complete rebuild, meaning nothing's there. And so, let's see, and then we have C Avenue. And C Avenue is kind of a traffic alternate, if you will, that the tribe agreed that would be a good thing to have. One of the things that we talked about at the Public Works Committee was, as you can see, some traffic circles. I put those in. We've been talking within engineering on a previous city engineer about trying to get a couple of those in certain areas for traffic calming, especially in areas that people speed. And having lived in this neighborhood, I kind of know where to put them, if you will. So we have the project schedule for this. We've already got the survey complete. We've partnered with the tribe to utilize their surveyor that actually designed their site. So then that way we come in on the same elevation and it's a plug and play, because they're ahead of us on the schedule, if you will, for the building. We're working with them on the drainage system for the whole area. It's the G11 basin, and we've identified some deficiencies in the downstream, and what that does is kind of tells them what they need to do for drainage on site, whether they put on-site detention or if they just have to do water quality. So they elected to pay for a drainage basin analysis to determine if there's any deficiencies downstream. So that'll help this project out. We're looking at going to request for qualifications on this project. So we're going to hire a consultant to come in and do the design and oversee the construction. So basically, we're just doing the construction management for this. The consultant selection, we're hoping to be done by the end of February, of which then we'll be back to City Council for a contract award with whomever we select for the consultant. We figure that the design will take 6 to 9 months to get done, and looking at construction in 2024. Their building for the center is set to go out to add April of 2023, and I'm not quite sure when they determine the physical completion for that. I think they got high hopes, but they say September, so the challenge has been accepted. But I want to bring up John Barrett and just have him say a few words, and then I figured we would open up to questions if you had any.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve, Mayor, members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, my name is John Barrett. I'm planning director for the Samish Indian Nation. I moved to Anacortes last year and grew up in Bellingham, so I haven't quite come home, but pretty close, and I'm just happy to be here. We're excited about the Early Learning Center project on D Avenue. I see some heads nodding, so you might have some familiarity with it. We did a groundbreaking there at the site last September, and I think perhaps one or two of you might have been there. We understand that these transportation or street improvements are a part of our project in terms of the conditional use permit issued by the city. And so it's a classic great example of there's a mutual interest here. And the funding that we have available to support these improvements are coming to the tribe through the Bureau of Indian Affairs transportation funding, if you're curious about that. So we're excited about this project, this possible partnership, and the potential future partnerships on some of the other areas of mutual interest that Steve mentioned. And I'm happy to help respond to any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Lang or Mr. Barrett? It is pretty exciting because we all know how expensive pavement and sidewalks and that kind of stuff is, and when we can partner and work together on the common improvements, it's great. So, Mr. Walters.
I do think this is a great example, as Mr. Lang says, of the potential partnerships between the city and the tribe. The tribe, being sort of a community-based tribe without its own reservation, has always been a substantial partner for the city, but the possibilities here, especially with tribal transportation program dollars, are substantial. I mean, Fidalgo Bay Road is probably a $10 million project, and there are no pockets of $10 million laying around that will ever build it out of the city coffers, but maybe FEMA, maybe TTP, maybe other sources of federal funding could rebuild that road, and it's obviously extremely important to Samish since they've got Fidalgo Bay Resort. With respect to this project, it has certainly grown in scope since it was originally conceived of. I tend to think that the traffic circles, they're not roundabouts, they're sort of traffic calming devices in the middle of those intersections, are critical components. So I gathered from Mr. Lang that there's some uncertainty about whether they will be part of the scope. Assuming the city engineer signs off of them, will they be part of the scope?
I think it's kind of a policy decision right now. You know, it's new. I'd like to put a couple in just to see how they work. I know that 17th Street really has some speeding issues. more so up top than they do down below, at least from the complaints that we get. I know that 15th Street gets them in this area. 13th Street gets it. It's just kind of odd that the even number streets don't. But knowing that this is going to extend through kind of offers some more opportunity for the traffic to go up into neighborhoods that otherwise wouldn't get that. And so therefore the extension of C Avenue over to 17th to help offset that.
Yeah, so I think that's the important component here. You know, we'll be punching in 16th Street where it doesn't currently exist. There will be impacts on the neighbors on 16th Street as a result. I think those little mini traffic circles will help mitigate that. I'm a believer in the grid network of roads, so you know, where we can have more extensions, I think as a general matter, it helps overall, but it will have more of a detrimental effect on any one particular road that doesn't currently see through traffic. So those mitigation measures, I think, are important. I am impressed with the scope and the amount of road we'll be building and sidewalk we'll be building as a result of this. I'd like to designate a school zone through there so that we can have some appropriate enforcement of speeds through there. And maybe there will be further expansion of Samish childcare in that area, which is exactly what we need, is one of the reasons we've been working in the childcare space from the City Council policies perspective over the last couple of years. So overall, I think it's a good project. Those details will be critically important to get it right. Mr. Lang, you and I had a brief conversation about what interaction with the neighborhood had already occurred. And
yeah, the Samish themselves have had a neighborhood meeting. For our involvement, I was going to wait until after this was approved and moving forward, and then I was going to send a letter out just kind of introducing the project and how we're going to be doing it, and get out in front and work with those folks. I know that I've gotten a few phone calls from some neighbors that, you know, they're told from this neighbor who was told from that neighbor, you know, and I want to be able to pull them all together and kind of give it to them the way that it's going to happen. The other thing that you mentioned was a school zone, and I think that's kind of part of why the scope creep a little bit, because we do have the Longhouse here. We also have the early learning center that in order to get traffic to slow down, you have to make the street look completely different than what it does. Putting up a a speed limit sign that says 25, they're going to ignore it, right? So with the curb extensions, the rapid flashing beacons, forgot to mention we're going to put bike lanes on both sides and kind of do a nice fat stripe down the middle with yellow. So hopefully that'll make it look completely different, that somebody will want to actually come down the hill at 40 miles an hour, actually want to slow down because all of a sudden it looks different.
And I definitely agree that that's a critical component. Putting up a speed limit sign by itself is not sufficient. I think that it's never too early to do outreach to the neighborhood. I guess it's also never too late. So if we approve this tonight, still got a chance. But you know, 16th Street, beyond where we're going to be punching it in, it was only a couple of years ago that it was just gravel. So we're going to be putting in a very nice street, but then it's going to unload onto what is still just, you know, a narrow strip of pavement with no curb gutter sidewalk on either side of it. So making these things mesh together as we do the improvements, I think, is a challenge. And there's some value in getting some local knowledge from the neighborhood as to what they see on the ground. I'm appreciative of the fact that you are providing that as well. Overall, I'm supportive of this agreement. I think we should move it forward.
I think just to help Mr. Lang out, part of the reason for the interlocal is for that full cooperation to be able to do that joint, kind of the joint outreach portion of it. That's helps solidify that relationship, and then obviously we'll be coming back with the contract later on. Ms. Cleveland. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. This is really exciting. I'm glad that you guys have been able to work together and get to this point. Just two questions. One is, is there funding available to start this project? What's that timeline look like? And then my second question is just, because I'm sure it makes sense when you're out there, but when you're looking at 17th Street and the dashed lines of what is being included, is there a reason there is that gap between C Avenue and D Avenue that's not going to have sidewalks on 17th?
Yeah, there's existing sidewalk there already.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so it'll all connect. It just kind of looks like there's a
Yeah,
a
yeah,
gap
we
there.
have to get into 17th Street a little bit just because of the grading, making sure that it flows correctly. The hatch line on D Avenue there, that's just going to be a gap based on development. And what I would like to do is do that as part of a sidewalk replacement program. As they're doing that work, that we participate, so that way it's done all at one time versus, hey, we have a gap here, when's this going to get done?
And you're talking about where it says city participation, the
Correct.
south end of D Avenue?
Correct.
Okay.
So to answer your first question, there is funding available. We did an estimate for them, and we do a 6-year calculation out, and that's typically what you go get the funding for. So then that way, if it takes you 3 years to get your project out, you still have enough funds if prices haven't skyrocketed to be able to do your project. So yeah, they went, and it's my understanding, and John can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they went and got 2.5 million for this.
What is the full cost for this? Do you know?
I think it's going to be less.
Okay.
My subtotal, I mean, I got 30% in engineering and contingency, so that's $500,000. And so my estimate came in at 1.65.
All right.
So-
Well, it's exciting because I know that there's a lot of folks who don't have sidewalks in front of their houses or in their neighborhoods. So anytime we can add
Yeah.
more sidewalks into these areas is a great improvement for folks.
Yeah, and so we're ready to get going on this as soon as the interlocal and all this is signed. Like I say, we'll get out and do the public outreach. I think one of the I don't know, of all the things that I'm excited about, because I've heard about it for so many years, is on the weekends in the ball fields and people parking on 15th and crossing 15th and sidewalks. And so part of this project, the Samish tribe is elected to fix that for us. So
Mr. Walters.
Another follow-up question, looking at the aerial, we'll be punching in 16th Street for the connectivity to D Avenue, which I think is important for the connectivity to D Avenue, being one of our major collectors. But then we'll also be punching in C Avenue, where it doesn't currently exist, between 16th and 17th. That one strikes me as less obvious to me. Did we look at improving B Avenue that does already exist and certainly could use some help between 16th and 17th as an alternative to punching in C?
kinda. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but we just went through and recently paved that, and they did it to a residential neighborhood standard. Like these folks, the way I looked at it when designing this as a master layout is directing traffic up into that area that they haven't seen before. With the idea that C Avenue would be the route to get over to 17th and back to D versus going one additional block west and then over and then one additional block back, or they take a right and head over to Oaks Avenue.
So you're thinking that C connection is principally for traffic coming off of D, passing by the Early Learning Center and
Yeah.
getting back onto D?
Yeah, and then folks that are, dropping off at the Early Learning Center and they head west, they can just take a left. And I mean, we could have put it over to 15th. It just seemed like C Avenue, because of the Long House is there. Kind of made sense.
Okay, any other questions? And perhaps approval of the interlocal so they can really get working together and then ultimately go out and bid it?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
I guess as a result of that back and forth, I would just encourage some flexibility in the scope as we talk about, or talk with the neighborhood about what they see on the ground as concerns or suggestions or ideas.
Yeah, it'll be our first time. The tribe did it for the conditional use permit. Now we're going to get out and talk to them about, the turning dirt. So that has a much more potential effect to people than the building itself. So yeah. And if it working with the tribe, if it seems more feasible to go up to B and over, then that's fine too. Yeah, not a problem.
Miller?
Mr. Walters.
I'll abstain from this vote because I initiated this project when I was Samish Planning Director. So I would encourage anyone else to make the motion if someone's going to do it.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. McDougall.
Yeah, I move that City Council authorize the mayor to execute the interlocal cooperative agreement 22-213 TRN 001 between the City of Anacortes and the Samish Indian Nation.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
It looked like Mr. Barrett maybe had one more thing to add, or not sure.
Yeah, thank you. Only that we can only spend our BIA transportation funding on roads that we have on the BIA inventory of streets that we have an interest in. So I would have to check, just on the topic of B Avenue, possibly including that in the scope. I'd have to check to see if B Avenue is on that inventory or not. Right now I'm not 100% sure.
Great point. Thank you.
And with that, I would like to second the motion.
Okay. Motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Ms. Moulton to approve the execution of the interlocal cooperative agreement between the City of Anacortes and the Samish Indian Nation. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Mr. Walters?
Same.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item 7B. This is a Washington State Working Families Tax Credit presentation discussion item, and I will let Ms. Moulton introduce this item and some guests, perhaps.
Thank you. So I'm standing in for Mr. Miesmer, Planning Director, for a brief moment to introduce Ms. Perla Gamboa from the Department of Revenue, who reached out to us a few months ago about a brand new tax credit for Washington workers that was passed in 2021 and goes live this year. And we are getting the word out because it will benefit families who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit and provides a refund up to $1,200 to eligible low to moderate income working individuals and families in Washington. So Ms. Gamboa has a presentation for all of us for that, and thank you for being with us this evening. We'll hand it over.
Of course.
Well,
Thank you and good evening, council members. I hope that everybody's seeing my presentation.
yeah,
I'm here to talk about.
we can see it, but I think we need to adjust ours, and Ms. Shu is on top of it. Thank you. But we can see your presentation, so go ahead.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about the Working Families Tax Credit, brand new program that is going to put cash back in the pockets of families, working families in your city. And so, again, my name is Perla Gamboa, and I'm the Outreach and Community Partnerships Manager. This program, the Working Families Tax Credit, is administered by the Washington State Department of Revenue. And so what is the program? As it was mentioned before, it's cash back to individuals and families that are low to moderate income. It was passed and funded in legislation, the House Bill 1297 last year. And it's based on the income level and the number of qualifying children, if families have any children, although it is also open to people that file taxes as single individuals. We're almost there, a few more days, and we're going to start accepting applications on February 1st for the first year of the program. To qualify for the program, The person, the individual, or the family will have had to file a federal income tax return for the previous year. This program is open to people that file their federal taxes, either with their social security numbers or with their individual taxpayer identification numbers, or ITINs. And those numbers, ITINs, are just a number the IRS provides to individuals that do not qualify for social security number, but they use this number to pay their taxes every year. Also, families need to qualify for the EITC, and so similar requirements regarding salary and the number of dependents in their families. For the Washington state, there is a requirement to have lived in the state for at least 183 days the year before, and that means a little bit over 6 months. And so that means that the money that families are going to be receiving will be used in our state. And so, for example, if a person lives in Oregon but commutes to Washington state to work here, that person will not qualify, because although they may be physically in the state of Washington, they do not have the requirement of residency, of living here in the state. There's also an age requirement. Only for people that don't have qualifying children, they need to be between 25 and 64 years old. But those that have qualifying children, there's no age requirement. So these are the amounts that will be provided during the first year of the program. And so if for a family, for example, that has 2 children, if a person files single, this is the max amount gross income that they need to make during the year. And if they file married, filing jointly, this is the max for this amount of money. Super important to notice that this is the first year, but it's a program that is here to stay. And so families and individuals can claim this money every single year after this, whenever they do their taxes. As I mentioned, we open applications February 1. The people can apply on our website online, workingfamiliescredit.wa.gov, or there's also paper applications in a number of languages, and they can be downloaded from our website or picked up from a local DOR office. Or also we have partnered with tax preparers and people that use specific software to file taxes. And so you may be familiar when you do your taxes. I don't know if you use TurboTax or HR Block, or you may do your own taxes using some software. We have partnered with several different companies. For example, TaxSlayer, which is the software that most VITA centers use. Those free services to people that need to file their taxes. And so our application for the state is embedded in their software. And so when a family or an individual goes to file their taxes, their federal taxes, they will see, based on the information that we have, you may also qualify for the new state of Washington credit, and they can apply right then. So we are doing a series of events to spread out the word. We have anticipated that there are 400,000 individuals in the state of Washington that will qualify for this program. And so we want to make sure that all and everybody has an opportunity to apply. There is an eligibility checker on our website. Again, that is workingfamiliescredit.wa.gov that people can use to make an informed decision if they will qualify for the credit. We have a partner toolkit, and this may be especially important for you. We have several different messages that are ready to copy and paste. So if any of you has a newsletter, for example, that you say to people in your city, this will be some information that you can share and make sure that everybody in the city of Anacortes has the information and can apply and ask for their money back. We have a media campaign, and you may have seen or will be seeing some of our ads on TV. They started last week. We are partnering with community-based organizations. Also, we have an advisory committee, and you received these slides, so we have all the information there. And the state was funded with $10 million to do outreach for this program. So we partner with the Department of Commerce and have funded 37 organizations throughout the state to provide this service. I do not believe that we have an organization in Anacortes, so I will be very pleased to share this information, disseminate this information through the council. We would really appreciate that. And that's pretty much about our program. Please help us spread the word. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. We're very excited that we're going to be able to provide this cash back to working families that need, and it's not a huge amount, but it's something that they can ask every year, and that, as you know, can make the difference in a family, whether or not they have the money to go to the doctor, or maybe for a big purchase, or maybe a down payment for a car, or paying the rent. And so we're excited that we're going to be able to serve our communities through this program. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Gamboa, and I know the council will work to get the word out to their constituents as well. I know that's the main objective here, is to get that message out. Council, any questions?
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
Thank you. And I just want to thank you again, Ms. Gamboa, for being here and doing this outreach. And just a couple of ideas that come to mind is using some of your material on our city website, on our news page. Also, we have a magazine that we publish twice a year that I think would be a great place for this information. And I'm also thinking of other things, but those are some good places that we can start. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we are on to item 7C. This is a comment on Seattle City Light Federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensing. This item with possible action, and Ms. Swetnam will be introducing our guests and the presentation, which I've been fortunate enough to see before, or at least something similar.
The right one, right? Okay, good. Thank you, Mayor Miller, members of council, members of the audience. I'm here just in an introductory role to introduce our guests. They've come to present some information for you all about the process that Seattle City Light is going through in relicensing some of their facilities up in the Skagit River through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So I'm introducing Jenna Freebull, who is the Executive Director of Skagit Drainage and Irrigation District Consortium. Daryl Hamburg is also here, and he is, correct me if I'm wrong, the Director of Operations for Dike District 17? And the Chairman of the Dike District Partnership. And then Will Honey is here, who is the Chief Civil Attorney for Skagit County. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thanks and welcome.
Start by thanking the mayor and city council for
Yeah, and you got to work your way over to the mic.
hosting us today. My name's Daryl. Once again, my name's Daryl Hamburg. A fifth generation Skagitonian. My family's been in the valley forever. I'm the executive director for the Dike District 17, and then the chairman of the board for the Dike District Partnership, which encumbers the 5 districts that protect people from the Skagit in the main lower part of the delta. I got my readers on so I can see what I'm doing here. Just a little fun facts, as they call them, sometimes not so fun, a little scary, but we'll start out, talk about the Skagit River. Skagit River is the 3rd largest river on the West Coast. It's 3rd only to the Sacramento and the Columbia River. Of those 3 rivers, the Skagit is the only one that has a wild and scenic designation. What that means is parts of the Skagit system, mainly the Sauk and the Cascade River, are considered uncontrolled. In other words, they don't have dams on them, so they are free-flowing, wild and scenic river stems that flow into the main stem Skagit. The Corps of Engineers estimates, and I don't know if you guys followed years ago when we were going through the GI study, the Corps tuned in on what they feel is an estimated 100-year or 1% event in the Skagit region, and it's they figure it roughly at 220,000 cubic feet per second. Just to give you a little bit of a basis on that, the Green River, to have a 100-year flood on the Green River, they estimate it somewhere around 21,000 cubic feet per second. So we're 10 times that. The river creates huge volumes of water during a flood event. Major populations and infrastructure that are located in the floodplain: Burlington, Mount Vernon, Sedro-Woolley, LaConner, Hamilton, Lyman, thankfully not Anacortes. Critical infrastructure: EMS facilities, fire, public works, police, hospital. The big one here for the city of Anacortes is there, and it's actually in my district that I give flood risk management for, is the freshwater water treatment plant that pumps out of the Skagit. I-5, Highway 9, never quotation here on Highway 20. You know already the vulnerability of Highway 20 based on the king tides we had here recently. Put a freshwater event of major magnitude on that. Transportation in and out of Fidalgo Island is gone. Highway 536 and Highway 11. Majority of Puget Sound Energy's power transfer stations are also in the floodplain. So these are just some of the non-residential impacts that we would have if there was an event. How do I move the next one? Oh, there we go. So as you're aware of, in 2021, we had a considerable event. By the Corps of Engineers, they estimate it to be what they call a 25-year event, or a 5% chance of happening every year, or in a 100-year calculation. That flood produced at the Mount Vernon gauge 130,000 cubic feet per second. Now, cubic feet per second is kind of hard to get your arms around of what that means. So I did a little Hamburg calculation here, and basically what it surmises to, that 130,000 CFS equals 1 million gallon jugs of water going by at any specific second. Not minute, but second. So just to put that into, into a term that at least is understandable in my way, is that's a lot of jugs of water. CLC Light had approximately 170,000 acre-feet of storage in the Ross Dam during this event. Under the current license, through the Water Control Manual, through the Corps, there's only 60,000 acre-feet that is remanded from Seattle City Light to have at that particular time. So in 2021, they had 110,000 extra acre-feet of storage at the Ross Dam. The Ross Dam is their only storage facility. The Diablo and the Gorge dams are all pass-through dams. In other words, the water that is generated through the Ross system is passed through as generation through Gorge and Diablo. They do not have storage. So during that event, they had inflows of record, of written historical record in the Baker and in the Ross. Ross had inflows of 67,000 cubic feet per second. So put it into perspective with the Green River, that's a lot of water. Outflows at the peak, because of the fact they had that extra storage, they were able to cut that down to 5,000 cubic feet per second during the peak of that flood. So what does that mean? It means if they didn't have that storage and they couldn't hold back that 5,000 cubic feet per second, or that 67,000 acre feet per second, and only release 5,000, it would have meant 8 extra feet of water hitting Mount Vernon. So to put in perspective on that, the water at peak was 37.3 feet at the Mount Vernon gauge. Our levees at their highest point are 41.5. So if you put 8 extra feet on 37 feet, you're at 45 plus, so you're 4 feet higher than our levees are, which obviously overtopping, if you actually overtop the flood wall in Mount Vernon, it would be higher than the 100-year record. Cut off all routes to hospitals, impact critical sewer infrastructure and water facilities. As we note, the Anacortes treatment plant is in that zone. So here's a little hydrograph of what happened during that event. The blue line is the water that was coming into the Ross system. The black line is how the water was released and how it was managed so that, like I said, we didn't get that extra 8 feet. So, as you know, we're going through this relicensing. Jennifer Friebel and Will Honey and I, we've been working on this for about 3.5 years. We've been following this since its inception. We put together a group that has been kind of carrying the torch for the county and the citizens of Skagit County, and it's Skagit County, the Dike District Partnership, the Drainage Consortium, and we are also closely interlinked with the Corps of Engineers who have helped us with putting together our requests and recommendations during this FERC relicensing process. Through the GI study, the Corps came up with alternative plans of how to best reduce flood risk. The one that always floated to the top was storage. And the reason for that is that it's non-structural. It is cost effective. And it is the easiest way to manage water. So that's why we're really focused on this right now. This license only comes around for reissuance every 50 years. So we have a 1 in 50-year shot of getting this on the table and being able to communicate with FERC licensing, the FERC process of what our needs are as a community to better protect ourselves from this flood risk that we have, which is not going away. We know it's getting more consistent. We're getting more water earlier, and it's climate change. It's happening. You can talk all about it all you want, but the statistically numbers don't lie.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
Sorry to interrupt so loudly, but could you, I don't know what a GI study is. Somehow I missed.
It's a general, I'm sorry about that.
That's
so
okay.
The Corps of Engineers did a general investigation study of the Skagit River on flood risk reduction to try to meet 100-year flood risk management. It was, I'm going to guess we were into it about 7 years. We got to a 7-year process, and then we got to a crossroad of how we would implement those alternatives, and we just weren't able to get there. It was so we basically what we did is the county and the Corps agreed to shelf the project, but use the information because it's good science moving forward as if we get the opportunity to do individual projects instead of trying to do a complete holistic approach to that major flood risk management. So the material is viable, the material is available, it's good science, and we use it quite a bit with working with projects on the main stem of the Skagit. I'm going to turn this over to my brain trust, which is Jennifer Friebel, and she's going to go through the ask and why we're making the ask and what the science is behind that.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. Okay, so like Daryl said, this is a 1 in 50 year. Every 50 years you get a chance to do this, but history matters. And so as part of our work getting ready for this FERC relicensing, we went back to the original 1946 recommendation of the Corps when the project was authorized, when the Ross project was authorized. And based on the calculations at that time, and there are certainly no shortage of records that indicate that the agreement was 200,000 acre-feet of flood storage at Ross. Somehow during the negotiation process between 1946 and 1954, City Light reduced that to 120 acre-feet, probably has something to do with power generation. So currently, that's been the protocol. 120 acre-feet of storage by December 1st of any year is what's in the Water Control Manual. Their current operations are dictated by the Water Control Manual, as well as the Fish Settlement Agreement, and it also includes recreational requirements for Ross primarily. And because of the fish settlement, the water control and recreation, they have some flexibility. But these mandates dictate that they start drawing down earlier than just what would be prescribed under the flood control schedule. So as Daryl said in 2021, thankfully, primarily because of the fish settlement agreement, they had extra storage for that November 21 flood. So our request is really actually quite simple, although it's complicated to get across the finish line. We're basically asking for more storage, so that's how much is available behind Ross Dam. Currently, it's 120,000 acre-feet. We're proposing to go to 200,000 acre-feet. We've done a lot of work with the Corps of Engineers on the technical end to justify that ask, but it's also in line with the original intent. The other key element of our request is earlier drawdown. And so what that means is shifting the time from December 1st, which is when the flood storage is fully available, to November 1st. It's consistent with the purpose of the project, which is primarily flood control. It's also consistent with the observed trend of major floods occur in October and November, well before December 1st. And so it's a recognition that we already know when major floods occur in the Skagit. We've had 6 or 8 just in the last 20 or 30 years. And it's also consistent with climate change predictions, which is we're going to continue to see early season large floods in the Skagit. And Daryl mentioned it's the most cost-effective way to reduce the risk to the community. So just a little bit of technical detail. We're getting a lot of questions on this. So this would have been 8 feet higher without the storage at Baker and the additional storage at Ross, which would have been catastrophic flooding. We all know that atmospheric rivers are becoming more frequent with climate change, more unpredictable, possibly larger with warmer air, and we're just consistent with the 1946 core recommendations. And this is just some summary information for you. We'll leave behind this presentation. So the earlier drawdowns is the other key thing. And this is just a record of the floods that we've had, all of which have occurred. These are just the major floods, all of which occur well before December 1st. So it's really early to shift. It's really important to shift the timing earlier. And you'll see that November 16th, 21 flood fits right in with the rest of them in terms of magnitude and sort of what we see at Mount Vernon. And so it might have been a record at Ross, but it's a huge watershed, and so you're balancing probabilities across a wide range. We've had a lot of questions about how Ross Reservoir works. Are we making the dam higher? And so the easy answer is no, the dam stays the same. But what happens is the water levels are drained out earlier. And so this graphic just shows Ross, the probable max flood. This is sort of where it's safe to have the water. Normal full pool lines up with where Ross is during the summer for recreational purposes. And the bottom line here represents typical operations at Ross. And so this is based on USGS data. They've been collecting it since 2008. And so it's really consistent that they're well below those according to their operations. If you were to compare that to the water control manual, you can see that the water levels would be much higher. So these red dots are mandated by Congress, and this is the maximum water level they can have. So you see they start drying it down in the fall, and then you don't have your full storage until well into December. And then they keep that, they're allowed to keep it for the remainder of the year. So our storage request lines up really well with their current operations. We would be shifting those water levels lower and earlier than the current water control manual, but very much in line with the current operations, which again, keep in mind, includes the fish settlement agreement. So this is really consistent with what we understand to be the current fisheries interests, which is important. We're working with a lot of partners on this. So just for an overlay. This just shows, the blue line just shows how that 21 flood came in. So you can see how much extra storage they had in the system, and you're still getting up to normal full pool. If they hadn't had the extra storage, what you would see is this peak would be well above probable max flood, which means you have a situation that's unsafe and you have basically uncontrolled spill. And it's hard on the facilities, and that makes it difficult to reduce the risk downstream. So that is basically what it means, is the reservoirs, there's no more room in the inn, the reservoir's full, and they're just dumping water as fast as they can. And that tends to pile up as you get lower in the system, like Burlington, Mount Vernon, Cedar Woolley. So I'm going to turn over to Will to sort of wrap this up with the next steps. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Will Honey with Skagit County. What we're asking, we're going to be filing, so Seattle City Lights filed a draft license application. And agencies, tribes, everybody in the next month or so is going to be filing our comments. We have gone through a really rigorous process with our consultant. We've engaged the former Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Joellen Darcy, is helping us out with talking to the Corps. We've really got a good team putting this together. And our ask to you is that you, along with the other cities, join us. I think one of the things, the thing that I opened it up to questions, but I think an important piece here is, in a sense, the political and legal component of this. In other words, the merits of what we're asking for, the reasonableness of what's being requested. As Daryl and Jenna mentioned, flood storage at Ross is the single most important flood risk mitigation measure in the Skagit Valley. It's at the top of the basin, and it takes the top off of really big floods, is what it does. And it benefits everyone in the valley because it's at the top of the watershed. The Ross project, when it was authorized, the first purpose of this project is flood control. Seattle had the ability to put this project on public land, and the quid pro quo for that was flood control. So this is not something that we should, I guess, feel ashamed to ask for. This is the principal purpose, the first purpose of this, and it's what the Army Corps recommended when the project was authorized through some machinations and maneuvers. Seattle argued over the years in the 50s, but back when there was no public process for anything and things just happened, that should be reduced. And the reason for that, they argued, was that, well, we make electricity in the winter and we need all the water we can get. What's happened in the intervening years is actually the tribes required them to start dumping water in the late summer and early fall to augment stream flows for fish, and that had the effect of drawing down the reservoir. That's why that curve is so much lower than their regulatory requirement. And so another thing that's happened is people have put in air conditioners. So during the summer months, electricity is now valuable. So they're not losing money, and they're having to do this anyway. We've been coordinating very extensively with the Upper Skagit Indian tribe that's asking for fish passage, which we also support because likely efficacy in terms of the fisheries resource. So we've been coordinating with them to make sure there's no problematic conflicts. And so no one else within this process is asking for some different operational model than we are. So there's not an immediately obvious conflict. We met with congressional staff the other day, and they asked the question that I assume is probably running through your heads, which is, why aren't they agreeing to this? And so we don't know. They're not telling us. As the short answer, I think we've asked that question internally and agency staff as well, the Army Corps. And the answer is that they want to keep their options open. There's a lot of things going on. I think one can speculate, I think with reasonably, that if there's a requirement to provide adequate flood storage, then this spillage of water can't be characterized as something for fish, and it can't be credited as a mitigation measure for fish. That's certainly one possibility, but no one's explained it to us. Whatever the case, as I mentioned, this is the most important thing we can do for flood risk mitigation in the Skagit Valley. And had that storage not been there during that last flood, it would have been catastrophic, including for the Anacortes water treatment plant, for the infrastructure, transportation infrastructure that allows people to get back and forth to Anacortes and so forth. We'd ask that you would join us and in asking for this. And the last thing I'd say is, you know, what we're relying on here is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is not, you know, a bunch of rural folks that think we ought to take control of this dam and use it for our purposes. The Congress put the Army Corps in. I'm a former Army officer, so I guess I'm biased, but Congress put the Army Corps in charge of flood safety, and this is what they recommend, and we think it's a reasonable ask for that reason. So with that, I'll wrap it up and ask if you have any questions.
All right, thank you. And I'll make a quick commentary. When I first saw the presentation, obviously I'm thinking of the Anacortes water treatment plant and protecting that, and all the great people in Skagit County that are working collaboratively together in the valley. But I couldn't help, I was a little self-interested thinking about our plant, but I couldn't help thinking about, well, there's actually another county that depends, about tens of thousands of people in Island County that depend on our water that go over there. So anyway, that was my thoughts when I saw this. So anyway, the ask is for council to sign on to this letter, and it was in your packet. So if you got any questions, go for it, council. And actually, before that, it is open for public comment, if any members of the public. All right, council, over to you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. You know, I was aware that basically the capacity of the dams really kind of saved Mount Vernon and, you know, the entire floodplain this past winter. But to see it sort of graphically, you know, in charts and everything is really great to have that, just sort of that data, that representation. I think this is a no-brainer. I grew up kind of out by Rosengard, so and I have like visceral memories of the winter where the levee broke at Fur Island and Fur Island was flooded, and that I noticed that the flood number was basically about the same as this one, only imagine 8 feet higher. And that break was actually, it was really fortunate. I mean, not fortunate for Fur Island, but very fortunate it wasn't the other side, because that was a bounded geography where the water was able to just flush out to Skagit Bay. So this one would have been, like, something similar would have been really catastrophic. So, A, thank you, and I think this is definitely a no-brainer.
Thank you.
Mr. Walters.
A couple of questions about some of these slides. Slide 3 says that the flood in November 2021 would have been 8 feet higher without the storage from Baker and Ross. Baker is licensed, and we're not looking at that one. So subtracting out Baker, do we know what just the impact of Ross's extra storage was on that flood?
Baker's quite a bit smaller. I mean, Ross is the real gorilla in the room in this whole picture. Daryl might be able to comment on that a little more.
So during that flood, we were in communication with John Chandler, who's the dam manager for the Baker system, and they were at max capacity, and he operates that dam very tightly to the water control manual. So their operations were in line with the water control manual, but their storage versus capacity is much smaller than the main stem at Skagit. And the Baker system didn't get the deluge of water that came in the main stem. So the 21 flood really, the atmospheric river really focused on the main stem. Baker took a pretty good hit, but the high end of the main stem, because it came through, the way that system came through, it came through the Whatcom area and then backed into the main stem Skagit. And it did give Baker record flows, no doubt about it, but their storage is very they run their storage very much by the book. Whereas the flexibility, as you saw in this graphic for the Ross system, they have the abilities to draw well below their mandated amount. If you talk, the guy to really talk to is the dam manager for the Baker, because he talks about pressure, flows, generation, and they have to run that thing really tight, because otherwise they don't have the right head pressure and they lose generation. So that they run that dam way tighter than, say, the Ross Dam, which is very big, very deep, and they don't have to worry about head pressure to create spin on the turbines. That's my most layman way of saying something I'm sure is very technical, but there's a big difference in those two watersheds and how they're managed and how much storage they have and why they stay within the minimums or draw way down. It's the abilities of the dam systems themselves, if that helps you any at all.
Okay, so yeah, I was just trying to obtain what the number was without Baker.
Yeah, so the
and so do we think it's
90% of the 8 feet was in the Skagit system, which is in the Ross.
So maybe a tweak of that bullet might
Yeah,
help make that point a
probably,
little more
because
strongly.
The Baker operated within their normal parameters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Ross system didn't. I mean, they just, like I said, 110,000 over acre feet of storage over what their minimum requirement is, whereas the Baker runs very tight to their minimum requirement.
And when you say 110,000 over their minimum requirement, do you mean their license requirement of
Yeah.
60,000?
Yeah, the minimum
Okay.
requirement, on November 15th, their minimum requirement was 60,000 acre feet.
What
and
is
they had
their
170.
What is their effective minimum requirement with this fish agreement?
That is the gray area or the mystical part that we haven't gotten a true answer to.
The fish agreement has to do with stream flow augmentation, so what you end up with in drawdown is going to vary from year to year based on inflows, whether it's a dry summer.
So it's less about storage and more about just putting more water at
Right.
particular times for
But it ends up being complementary, and what we're asking for would essentially slightly increase the requirement to spill water, and so it would just be a question of timing.
And the 2021 flood, you said that was a 25-year event, but it would have been higher than a 100-year flood event in downtown Mount Vernon? How are those two figures reconciled?
Yes, so those numbers are all reconciled with the Corps of Engineers. They do all the calculations on that stuff. A 25-year event, a 100-year event is a number that is calculated by studies that the Corps does on flow analysis, and they even use stuff that goes back into the early 1900s to evaluate what those numbers are. It's nothing that we have any control over, so to speak. It's just it's a target program that the Corps uses in order to evaluate and measure water volumes.
So my understanding is the 100-year event is the 1% chance flood in any given year, but that also that was calculated based on old measurements, and with climate change, those measurements and those probabilities are not likely to be the same probabilities that we see into the future. So I guess my real question is, the 2021 flood, which was a bad event, but could have been much worse without the storage, what's the probability of that happening next year? Is that a 25-year event, or are you saying that maybe that's more of a 100-year event?
Yeah, so I think it's a 25-year event, is what the Corps is telling us, and that's what the history would tell us. And it's a regulated 25-year event. So if it would hit the Sauk River, it'd be unregulated, so you're looking at discharge at Mount Vernon, such those probability curves. I think what's tricky is that if you look at the subbasin that drains just to the Ross Reservoir, 100-year event. No doubt about it, biggest inflow they've ever seen. But it's definitely in line with climate predictions. And so where the atmospheric river hits in the watershed dictates how much flow you get at Mount Vernon. Is it hitting the Sauk where it's unregulated? Is it hitting the Ross where you have extra storage, the Baker? And if the atmospheric rivers get wider, then you could have bigger magnitude storms than you'd see today. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. That's an important distinction, you know, where that all water is coming from. It's not just one system, I suppose.
Right, yeah, all the other systems were also flooding, but it takes a lot of adding up, like a conveyor belt.
So I just, from the perspective of the city of Anacortes, I think that we are inextricably bound to this river, not just for flood control, but also for fish. I mean, I think, Will, the last time, or the first time you gave a presentation in this council chambers was quite a bit of a different audience, but it was also about the Skagit River.
Water rights, yeah.
So that's why I think this council has supported signing on to letters about protecting the headwaters in Canada. We've signed on to really a lot of different measures in support of fish and flood control on the Skagit, and I guess as well on the Baker. King 5 had an excellent series about Seattle City Light and the Skagit River main stem dams. I encourage people to watch it because it's really eye-opening. If you haven't been up there, just take a look at the Google Maps. There is no Skagit River for some portion of the Skagit River because they've taken all the water out of it. I definitely advocate signing on to this letter. I would advocate going beyond that and also embracing the fish aspect of the relicensing process. But I also want us to understand the magnitude of this potential problem. If we flooded the water treatment plant because we overtopped the levees, beyond the damage to the levees, the water treatment plant would be damaged. I understand we would be potentially without water for up to 45 days because you can't just take Skagit River water and start sending it through the system. You've got to clean the plant. And that's after you get people back in there. That's after the floodwaters go down and you can start dealing with the situation. We must have this flood storage. The weather patterns and climate predictions are only going to get worse. So let's sign on to this letter, but also let's not let it stop here. You know, the letter's a great first shot across the bow. We need to do whatever is necessary to get this flood storage and be able to manage the river for flood events and protect our water treatment plant. If nothing else, we need to protect our water treatment plant. Are the other cities also signing on to letters of this, at least of this type?
Mount Vernon, I think, has LaConner signed something yet? Cedar Woolley, I think we're presenting to Burlington on Thursday. And then as far as endorsing Fish Passage, I think it was a number of cities have as well, Cedar Woolley, some of the...
I seem to recall we sent a letter on that many months ago.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah, so obviously there's much more infrastructure than just the water treatment plant, but if there's anything that needs to justify our action, let's use that.
Thank you.
One thing I just wanted to add to this is that Will brought up that we were working with the Upper Skagits on this to make sure that we're not adversely impacting their interests. One of the things we've done is we've hired Anchor. It's a consulting firm to run these models that City Light's given us. And we're also working with the tribes to add the fish passage caveat to that to see how they work together. So we're spending a lot of time working with the Upper Skagits on the fish passage issue as well as the flood control issue and see how they work together. And I just wanted to make sure that we brought that up.
All right. Any other questions? I felt like I had a couple of motions there on council to move forward, but I'll take a real one.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
I move that we approve the proposed letter in the packet to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission about the Seattle Hydroelectric Project relicensing. And looks like there's a spot for all of us to sign it.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Ms. Cleland to approve the signing of the FERC letter as presented in the packet. Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thanks. And I do have a copy of the letter for signature that I'll be passing around. So.
Thank you very much. We appreciate
All
it.
right, thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. All right, we are on to item 7D, which is Resolution 3106, intent to award banking services contract. This is a discussion item with possible action, and this is Mr. Hoagland. Mr. Hoagland, and I know I didn't give you enough time to get up and set up your PowerPoint. But that's all right, council is signing off on the letter now, so you got some time. All right, go ahead, Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. First item tonight, the resolution before you now is to authorize the transfer of banking services from the city's current bank, which is Banner Bank, to Savvy Bank. So back in September, the city issued an RFP for banking services, a request for proposals. There are 8 banks in the city of Anacortes that are eligible to provide municipal banking services. We sent RFPs to all 8 of them, and 2 responded. After review of the 2 banks, there was Savvy Bank was the bank that came out on top of our score sheets for the RFP. And there's the nature of RFPs, as you're familiar, is there's a lot of information that needs to be interpreted. But one of the things that we required was an estimate of fees, and the fee structure for Savvy Bank was much preferable to the other RFP. That really pushed it over for us as far as the award goes. So staff's recommending that we transfer banking services to Savvy Bank. Once this resolution's in place, then the bank will start putting together bank accounts, signature cards, things of that nature, and we'll get the process going. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, council, I know this was presented to Finance Committee, but council, any questions for Mr. Hoagland or for the Finance Committee perhaps? Not a one. They're saving all the questions for your budget update.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
I'd like to thank staff for doing this and finding the best match for us. And with that, I move to approve Resolution 3106, authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Savvy Bank to provide the City of Anacortes municipal banking services.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Carter to approve Resolution 3106, awarding for City of Anacortes to move city banking services to Savvy Bank. Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, on to item 7E, 2022 year-end finance update. This is a discussion item, but it pairs nicely with 7F, which is the ordinance 4040, the year-end budget amendment, which will be a discussion with possible action. But starting with the year-end finance update, Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor. So all of these charts should look familiar. The reporting that I bring here is pretty routine. So these are the major tax revenue streams that we had in place for 2022. We have the budget column, or this column representing the budgeted revenues, the actual revenues, and then the percentage of collections. So at the end of the year, 100% of the year is concluded. You would expect to be around that percent. And looking down the list, you can see that each of our major tax revenue streams actually exceeded what we had budgeted. And these larger revenue streams, I'll go into more detail with each of those. So sales tax to begin with. We budgeted to collect $5.5 million for the year, 5.571. We collected $6,033,000, so we exceeded budget by 8.3%. So a pretty healthy difference. And the next chart here just shows the same information in a trend format over the last few years. And the $6,033,000 collected in 2022 is 9.6% over what we collected in 2021 at $5.5 million. Next major revenue stream, private utility tax. This is one we've talked about at length at different times. Private utility taxes, the utility tax we charge on private utilities, natural gas, cable TV, electricity, telephone service. And this has been, it's been flat or decreasing for the last several years. And we have budgeted that way, and you can see this year our budget actually exceeded, our revenues actually exceeded budget by 7.9%. So the healthiest margin we've seen in quite some time. And looking at the trend over the last several years, you can see back in 2019 we were down 6% compared to the prior year, and then at 1.1 and 1.5% increases, a 7% increase in 2022. So this, I think, is attributed to many of us have seen utility rate increases in some of our bills, but we've also experienced increases in population here in town, which has increased consumption as well. The public utility tax, or taxes, utility tax on the city's utilities, water, sewer, solid waste, and storm sewer. We budgeted 2.26, collected 2.99, just 1.8% over budget. Looking at this trend over the last several years, you'll see in 2019 we had a large increase over the prior year. It was pretty stable in 2020, and then 6.2 and then 6.1% in 2022. So pretty stable increases in those public utility taxes aside from the COVID year. This is building permit revenue. I'll increase that a little bit. Please ignore the blue line. This is actually, the blue line represents collections through November. So this top black line here is the collection for the full year. So in 2022, building revenues at $727,000 in total, compared to $875,000, $668,000 the year before that. So building revenues continue to be strong. I have the number of building permits issued for the last few years. 2022, 62 single-family residents, and that compares to 81 last year and 57 the year before. Multifamily 3, commercial 8. So the building permit issuance right in the ballpark with what we've seen in the recent past.
Mr. Walters?
And Mr. Hoagland, when you report the building permit numbers here, you're reporting individual permits, not dwelling units, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so in the past when it was all single family, those numbers were, I suppose, the same, but now that it's much more multifamily generally, and I don't know where mixed use fits into this chart, the number of dwelling units will differ, and that might be another useful metric because it's going to be associated with impact fees, it's going to be associated obviously with meeting our housing goals. I wonder if you could work that into future charts.
Yeah, we'll give that some thought here in the coming months to be able to start monitoring that. That's becoming, a bigger piece of the building sector than what we've had in the past. And the multi-use is another one that we need to get our hands around how we're going to monitor and report that, because we really haven't seen that, for some time now, and now we're starting to see a couple of those buildings pop up. I want to talk about real estate excise tax real briefly. You can see our trend over the last several years, very consistent upward trend, 1.55 this year compared with almost identical revenue last year. So the one thing that's interesting, I showed this chart to council before, but this is looking, and please, I didn't update. This is January through December. It's for the full year, these numbers. Forgot to update my headers there. But looking at the REIT collection for 2022 at 1.55, so real estate excise tax is is applied to home sales that are sold after they're initially constructed. So when a house is constructed, it generates sales tax. When they're sold after that, they generate real estate excise tax. So we track these home transfers through the utility billing department. 2022, we had 353 home transfers, generating 1.5 million. Last year it was 1.5 million with 418 home transfers. The year before that, slightly less money with a higher number of home sales. So this is, it's hard to say one data point is, you know, a trend or an indicator, but that's what it looks like to me. This is the first area that I've seen that indicates some segments of the economy are slowing down, and it's in the real estate market. The revenue is generated based on the sale of the home, and because of the increasing nature of the home prices in Anacortes, it hasn't affected our revenue stream, but we can see the number of home sales has decreased.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Well, I'm assuming that that's directly correlated with interest rates, though, right?
Yeah, most definitely it has to be.
And REIT per sale is also directly correlated with the average home price.
Yes,
and
right.
Looking at those numbers, it's pretty dramatic from 2016, 2,700 to 4,400. And of course, that 4,400 number is also, that's an average with many, many fewer homes sold in 2022.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
It gives just a little peek into the increasing price of individual homes.
Exactly. Yep. Next chart I have just to look at impact fees. So for the year 2022, collected $544,000, roughly the same as we collected last year at $524,000. The cash balance for REIT, we have $722,000 in streets, $146,000 in parks, and $342,000 in fire. And the cemetery project that we did last year, as a reminder, we used impact fees because we couldn't use REIT on that project. So that pretty much wiped out the parks impact fee cash after last year. So it generated all of that $146,000 in this current year. 2022, we haven't done our project reconciliations yet. We did have $200,000 budgeted for the 32nd and M roundabout. So that'll be coming out of that $722,000 and being transferred into the road construction cash. But and down to just, this is the overall chart looking at all of our different funds. It's pretty simple setup by fund. So the top fund is the general fund here. Top line is revenue budget, revenue actuals, and expenditure budget and expenditure actuals. And then you can see the change between the two during the year. So as we go through here, you'll see I put fourth quarter budget amendment for QBA next to several of these. And these are the funds that are in an over budget condition right now, unless council adopts or approves the budget amendment that's to come after this. It's pretty easy to see, though, each of these funds that are in an over budget condition right now, what happened. So Parks and Rec revenue, we initially budgeted $2.2 million. Revenue came in at nearly 2.4 at 108% of budget. Expenditures exceeded budget by 2% or $135,000. So this is included in the fourth quarter budget amendment. Cemetery project is over budget by 8% as well. Again, their revenues exceeded what was originally brought in. A big part of that condition, though, was the road project that was done in the cemetery during the year, and that was paid for out of cemetery cash. The library fund is just about right on the button, 1.7 in expenditures. Our revenues, 1.6 in expenditures. Street maintenance fund, road construction fund. Stop me on any of these if you want. If you have questions or want me to dig into any of this information more. Washington Park, revenues at a crazy 149% of what we budgeted. Expenditures over budget by 8%. Washington Park has just been crazy since COVID hit. And the staycations, I expected that to go away, but they haven't. They just have increased every year. It's
Just to clarify, crazy good.
crazy good, yes, sir. A little bit of activity in the Parks Capital Fund. Affordable housing, this is,
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
Thanks. Mr. Hoagland, can you remind me why the Parks capital numbers are so different from the left to the right column?
yeah, so we have budgeted 1.7. We spent a little less than 200,000. Trying to remember now the biggest items. I think it's, the skate park was one of those items that has been deferred a little bit. They're now.
And we have the Parks Director here just in case. We need to do a head nod. The skate park's the big chunk of that. Yes, they got the thumbs up.
Thank you.
Fund 109 is the Affordable Housing Fund. This is, I forgot to put the little 4QBA. This was on the budget amendment as well, though. You see we budgeted 655,000, and all of that goes out. So that's just an in and an out. We split that revenue stream with the Family Center and the Housing Authority to support their affordable housing construction programs. The Ambulance Service Fund, I see revenues are nearly $1 million over what we budgeted. Associated expenditures are also up, but you can see that revenues still exceeded expenditures by 8%. Impact fees, the ACFL fund, lodging tax. We talked about, so the utilities. The water fund, we budgeted 20.4 million, spent 13 million. I believe the biggest discrepancy there was we had money set aside for the water treatment. The old treatment plant demolition, that project is now going to be worked in this year, 2023. Sewer, the difference there is 20 million in the outfall project that has been deferred now. Storm drain, this is a great story. The storm drain fund, you remember a few years ago we had to do an interfund loan at year end just to keep it solvent. That fund has gotten healthy now and back to good standing in just a few years. The solid waste fund, 450 sanitation, so we have a budget amendment for that as well. And we've seen this before and during years that have a high construction activity. It just generates more waste, so there's higher consumption. The expenditures for tonnage out to, or the tonnage dropped at the transfer station, but we also have increased revenues that offset that. And then equipment rental and the Fireman's Pension Fund. We still have 2 pre-LEF recipients of the money out of this fund, so that's it in a kind of broad overview. I'd be happy to go into detail on anything that you might have questions on.
And this is open for public comment if anybody wants to comment. And no raised hand online. Council comments on questions from Mr. Hoagland?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
On that last one, the Fireman's Pension Fund, there was a budgeted amount of 46,000 and the actuals were 50.
Yes, good point, good question. So we're not actually, the BARS manual doesn't actually require that trust funds be budgeted. So I like to put that information in there because from time to time we do include property tax as one of the revenue sources. That's not been the case the last couple of years. It's got around, I want to say around 250,000 in cash. The primary revenue stream for that fund is tax, fire insurance premium tax that we get from the state, and we get about $1,000 per active firefighter that funds that pre-LEF pension fund. But that's the reason I didn't include it in the budget amendment, just because it's.
And I think that is also driven by the statute. I think there's a statute on point there too, not requiring a budget amendment or that to be controlled by the numbers that are in the budget. But otherwise, for these items that do require a budget amendment, for the other funds that are listed here that are in an over budget condition, if we didn't approve a budget amendment, we would likely get an audit finding.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
And another way that we could end up with an audit finding is if you spent all of the money that was in a fund and you went negative on the fund balance.
Correct, yes.
Which we're unlikely to do here because each of these funds have balances.
Yes, thank you. That is an excellent point. All of these departments that are relying on cash reserves or fund balance to offset those increased expenditures have healthy cash reserves. So, yeah.
And so I mention that because what I would like to see, and I don't want to just spout into the ether here, but I'm hoping that some other council members might also chime in. I would like to see a list on these reports, these quarterly reports, of the fund balance for each fund. Add that column so that we are well informed, especially when it comes time to annual budget, as to what amount of money is contained within each fund.
Great point. Yeah, that would be easy enough to add. Absolutely.
Do other council members concur? Yeah. Thank you.
Easy enough to add. Got it.
Okay, so if no other questions on this material, I can jump into the budget amendment.
All right,
So,
7F.
in this first whereas, I gave a little bit of background on part of our budget issue. So what council may remember, late last year when we were going through the budget process, several of our collective bargaining agreements were in the negotiation process. So we did not have a COLA incorporated into the salary and wages budget estimates. And several of those, at least one of those agreements was not approved until well after year end. We were well into the budget year. So I didn't do a budget amendment across the board to capture all of those increases. We kind of made the decision to just monitor the budget as we went and see how the departments managed those existing budgets. And it turned out that we do have a number of departments that need those areas addressed, but we do have a number of departments that actually just were able to manage within their discretionary spending to stay within the budgets that were adopted. So I want to drop down to this, the matrix that shows the different numbers that I'm requesting amendment to. So Fund 101 is the Parks and Rec Fund, and there's several different wage lines here because there are different divisions within the Parks Department, and that's how we allocate the budget. But that's what was driving the need for budget amendment, is those wage increases that I was just talking about, driven by the CBAs. And then utilities, just like in our home budgets, a lot of our departments experienced increased utility actuals against the budgets that we put into place. So total for Parks and Rec, out of those budget amendment requests is $67,000, and that would come out of cash reserves. Fund 102 is the cemetery fund, so the supply line of $24,000, that's the road repaving in the cemetery that I was referring to earlier. Something like that we would normally try to work into our road maintenance program, but we, as I mentioned, can't use REACH for the cemetery. Again, utilities, in addition to increasing utilities, cemetery has a lot bigger area now to water and keep up. So a total of $41,000 out of cash reserves. 107, this is the Washington Park Fund. So asking for a budget increase of a total of $24,000, $14,000 of that in wages, $10,000 in utilities. Fund 109, that's the Affordable Housing Fund. So we collected more sales tax than we anticipated, sent all of that out to the Family Center and Housing Authority. So it's just a matter of getting the budget up to what the actual expenditures were. The cash flow obviously was was there to support that. Fund 110 is the EMS fund, the ambulance service fund. So we have 180,000 in salaries, 50,000 in overtime associated with those salary and wages. This part here is not, it can be a little bit confusing. So the miscellaneous write-offs, 389,000, and then the write-offs for the GEMT program. So we are not when we send an ambulance bill to a customer, their insurance pays for a portion of that. Generally there's some kind of a fee left that needs to be paid by the customer. In some cases, particularly with Medicare and Medicaid, we are not allowed to collect that unpaid portion. And with those two programs, that runs at about 50%. So we end up writing about 50% of those transports off. And I want to say more than half of our transports in the city of Anacortes through our EMS system are Medicare and Medicaid related. So it's a big portion of our customer base. These are non-cash transactions. They're just part of the accounting structure. So the $674,000 that we're requesting in a budget amendment, $230,000 of that is actual cash expense in the form of salaries and overtime. The rest of it, though, is non-cash, just an accounting side of the transaction. Fund 450 is the solid waste fund. As I mentioned, the consumption increased pretty significantly over what we were expecting. In addition to that, I think there was $30,000 budgeted for new dumpsters. They spent $46,000 on new dumpsters. That number just kind of changes from year to year as the need arises for those dumpsters. But that's the two items that need to be addressed. Total of $226,000 in the solid waste fund. And again, those are offset by increased revenues in that fund. So hopefully, I know I went through that kind of quickly. Hopefully it made sense. I'm happy to go back or answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Hoagland or any more public comment? We lost our online attendee. I'm not because of your presentation, Mr. Hoagland. Council.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
So I see where that has been corrected on your presentation from our packet. Sorry, that was one of my questions. But the other one is, this is really great information. Thank you. In future reports like this, could we have the name of the fund also included next to the BARS number?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. Thank you.
Wait, you don't have all the bars numbers memorized? I think I have that. We've had that conversation all the time. Thank you for the reminder. Mr. Walters.
I move approval of ordinance 4040 as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. McDougall to approve ordinance 4040. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, could you take the vote, please?
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. Walters. Yes. Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, our last item is 7G, ordinance 4035, amending chapter 10.12, and Ms. Swetnam, I think, present this one.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council, remaining members of the audience. So tonight is the third read and a pared down version of Ordinance 4035, which was one of the public safety ordinances. There were three that came before council in late 2022. And the other two were adopted, but this one deals with parking. As it was originally drafted, spoke to oversized parking, and there were some issues that were identified that warranted a little more work from staff and more thought from council. But one of the points that was brought up through the process of looking at that ordinance was that the current code sets a penalty for violations of this particular article of that Title 10 as misdemeanor. So it's currently a misdemeanor violation to park your vehicle longer than the 72-hour limit. So in looking at that, that seemed to not be the right approach from the perspective of law enforcement. And so there was an interest to address that issue while the good work continues on the rest of the parking chapter to clean those things up. So the way that it's proposed, I went back and looked at the differences between articles and chapters in chapter 10, 12, and staff is making the recommendation that the ordinance be amended to change that misdemeanor to a Class 2 civil infraction. I believe Mr. Walters had some amendments that we might be making tonight. But other than that, Chief Floyd is here, and we are both happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walters?
Mayor Miller, thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree that we need to make this change and make it sooner than we can before we rewrite the entirety of the chapter, which everyone who has looked at the chapter also agrees we need to do. That's all premised on the idea that it shouldn't be a criminal offense to park wrong. It makes a lot more sense to be able to issue civil infractions for expeditious enforcement, but also to have the punishment fit the crime in a metaphorical sense, since it wouldn't be a crime, it'd be a civil offense. I have a couple of ideas, though. First, I would like it to not be a crime immediately. I think we all assumed that it wasn't a misdemeanor until we really dug in and found that it was. So with approval of 5 of our votes, this ordinance could go into effect immediately rather than wait for publication. So I would propose an alternative Section 2. Section 2 right now says, consistent with the statute, this ordinance takes effect 5 days after passage and publication. I'd propose, consistent with RCW 35A 12130, having received the votes of a majority plus 1 of the whole membership of the council and having been designated as a public emergency ordinance necessary for the protection of public health, public safety, public property, or the public peace, this ordinance is made effective immediately upon adoption. That wipes that out. And we don't have to wait 5, 10 days, whatever it takes to get it published, and then to wait another 5 days. And then my next suggestion is premised on a question, and that is, have we been using the misdemeanor provision? Has APD referred any charges to the prosecutor for misdemeanor prosecution under this provision during this time when we discovered that it's not a civil infraction in the code to now?
And as you were asking that question, Chief Floyd is coming up to the podium to go ahead.
The answer to your question is yes, we have. As recently as last week, we had our enforcement team out. We issued a total of 9 criminal charges. Some of those were for the littering and some of those were for the parking. We had a total of 19 since the beginning of the year that we had to go back and correct with our courts. So through the course of this process, and that's why I requested that Ms. Swetnam put this on the agenda for tonight with our enforcement teams going out on a routine basis multiple times a week. We'd like to be able to appropriately charge the statute as an infraction as opposed to a misdemeanor.
So I propose that revision to Section 2 that would make it go into effect immediately to let you do that. But I also do continue to not think that people should be charged with a crime for parking incorrectly. So I would propose an additional Section 3 that would clarify that. A lot of cities have in their codes a provision that says, well, if you repeal an ordinance, that ordinance continues to be in effect for crimes that occurred prior to repeal. We don't have that provision such that I found. So I could certainly make the case that if we repeal this provision creating a misdemeanor, that those misdemeanor charges should be mooted and go away. But to make it very clear, I would propose a new section 3 that says, adoption of this ordinance is intended to preclude currently pending prosecutions of violations of the prior ordinance repealed by this ordinance, and to waive any fee or penalty due and unpaid under such ordinance. Do you have any reaction to that?
I've already spoke with our court administrator, and we're working with the prosecutor to have those previously charged cases amended in court so they're charged appropriately.
Okay, I guess I don't. Can you say more about that?
I've spoken with
what
our,
I'm proposing is that anything charged as a misdemeanor would be wiped out.
Correct.
And I think I understood you to say that the infractions that were charged or that were filed when they weren't authorized, you were working to recharge them as misdemeanors.
in addition to the criminal charges that were filed as of last week when we were out, using the statute as it was currently written prior to today. So I'll be working with our prosecutor and court administrator to dismiss those cases and have them refiled appropriately as infractions.
Okay. I guess I would find it questionable to file them as infractions if this ordinance didn't exist at the time of the infraction. But still, my objective is to make sure that people aren't charged with misdemeanors.
Correct.
So,
I think we're trying to get to the same place.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm worried about the, I'm worried that we're talking past each other a little bit. The section 3 that you proposed sounds like it completely wipes any of those citations, we'll call them. I know that's not the correct term, away, whereas I don't want the work of our police department that's already happened to just go away, because I understand the intent of the legislative body here is to change it, but that doesn't mean that those previous infractions didn't exist under the same new intent. So as civil infractions as opposed to misdemeanors. But my reading of your section 3 drops all those charges away.
Yeah, I think that there's a fundamental problem with citing people with a civil infraction when the law creating the civil infraction didn't exist at the time of the behavior. It was a misdemeanor. It is a misdemeanor today. I would like to wipe those out as well. If we repeal a law creating the crime should go away as well, unless there's a provision that says anything contrary to that. Well, so let me put something on the table here. I move approval of the ordinance as presented with the following two changes. A revised section 2, as I read earlier, that would make the ordinance go into effect immediately, and a new section 3 that would, as I read earlier, that would preclude any prosecutions under the existing misdemeanor provision.
And could you read the section 3 again to make sure, Mr. Franciak, if you've got that?
That reads as, adoption of this ordinance is intended to preclude currently pending prosecutions of violations of the prior ordinance that are repealed by this ordinance, and to waive any fee or penalty due and unpaid under such ordinance.
Okay, everybody got that one? Okay, so there's a motion.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Mr. Carter to approve ordinance 4035 with the amended section 2 that I do not, I'll summarize as will take place immediately, and section 3 that I'll summarize that will nullify any existing previous citations under the ordinance. And citation is probably not the correct word. Pending prosecution. Thank you. And those were summaries. Mr. Franciak has the exact words, but I think everybody hopefully has got that. All right, any additional comments? All right, Mr. Franciak, would you take the vote, please?
Mr.
Mr. Carter? Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Good work. Appreciate the work. And with nothing further before the council, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.